I was still holding a cardboard box filled with desk supplies from my old job, standing in the middle of my apartment when my phone vibrated in my hand. I remember the exact weight of that box, the smell of stale coffee clinging to my clothes, the way my shoulders ached from carrying things that suddenly felt pointless. And then I read the words that changed everything. I'm not wasting my 20s with someone who's broke. That was it. No conversation, no warning, no face-to-face goodbye. Just a message sent while I was still emotionally reeling from being laid off hours earlier. I hadn't even made it home yet when my boyfriend decided I was no longer worth his time. 2 years together, reduced to a few lines of text, and a digital door slammed shut before I could say a word. What he didn't know was that I wasn't actually falling apart. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't spiraling. I had savings. I had experience. And most importantly, I had just walked out of an interview with a startup that saw my value clearly enough to offer me equity and a signing bonus that would change my future. He didn't know any of that because he never gave me the chance to tell him. He decided who I was at my lowest moment and walked away. 6 months later, I stepped out of a company car at a shopping mall, sunlight flashing across polished black doors, and heard my name spoken in a voice I thought I'd left behind. When I turned around, he was standing there, frozen, staring at me like he'd just seen a ghost. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The same person who couldn't stand by me when things were uncertain suddenly wanted to talk when my life looked impressive again. That was my mistake. I answered him once, and that answer made him disappear instantly. I'm 35 years old, and until half a year ago, I thought I had my life neatly mapped out. I thought love was about stability, about growing together, about standing firm when things shook. I didn't know yet that some people don't leave because you fall. They leave because they don't want to climb with you when the road gets steep. And I had no idea how far that road was about to take me without him. I was 35 when everything unraveled, but the story didn't begin with that text message. It started 2 years earlier in a season of my life that felt steady, predictable, and safe. I was working as a software architect at a mid-sized tech company, the kind of place that didn't make headlines but paid well enough to let you breathe. My days were structured, my income reliable, my future seemingly mapped out in reasonable steps. Nothing flashy, just comfortable. And at the time, comfort felt like success. That was when I met Mason. He was 28, sharp-dressed, quick to smile, working in marketing for a fashion brand that cared deeply about appearances. We met through a mutual friend at a casual dinner, one of those nights where conversation flows easily, and you don't realize something important is taking shape until it already has. Mason was charming in an effortless way. He asked questions. He listened. He laughed at the right moments and made me feel seen without trying too hard. Our relationship grew naturally. We didn't rush into moving in together, but we spent most nights at each other's places. My apartment was quieter, more practical. His was curated, always just slightly too perfect, like a showroom meant to impress. I noticed the difference early on, but I didn't think it mattered. We were different, I told myself. That was normal. For the first year, things felt easy. We traveled on long weekends. We cooked together. We talked about the future in vague but hopeful terms. Not timelines, not commitments, just possibilities. Mason liked to talk about where he wanted to be by 30. Promotions, lifestyle, stability. I listened and nodded, assuming I fit somewhere in that picture because why wouldn't I? Looking back now, there were signs. Small ones. The kind you brush aside because love makes you generous with excuses. Mason was always more comfortable when things were going well. When my work was busy but secure. When dinners were planned in advance. When life followed an upward trajectory. Any hint of uncertainty made him restless. He'd check his phone more. He'd talk about friends who were doing better or couples who were moving forward faster. I told myself he was ambitious. That ambition wasn't a flaw. His family liked me, at least on the surface. They were polite, welcoming, but there was always an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. His mother asked a lot of questions about my job. His father liked to joke about long-term security. It never felt hostile, just evaluative, as if I were being quietly measured against an invisible standard. I ignored the discomfort because nothing was overtly wrong. Mason never raised his voice. He never cheated. He never treated me poorly in obvious ways. And when someone doesn't hurt you loudly, you convince yourself they're not hurting you at all. We lived separate lives financially, which I thought was healthy. I paid my bills. He paid his. I didn't ask questions about his spending, and he didn't offer explanations. Sometimes he made comments about wanting a certain kind of life, a certain pace, a certain level of ease. I assumed he was dreaming out loud, not setting conditions. When my company announced restructuring, I didn't panic. I'd seen the industry shift. I'd prepared quietly. I had savings. I had interviews lined up. I thought I was being responsible. I thought I was handling adulthood correctly. I told Mason over dinner at his place, watching him stir pasta at the stove, thinking honesty would bring us closer. I didn't realize I was standing at the edge of something fragile. I didn't see that for him, love had terms I didn't know I was agreeing to. The silence that followed my words should have warned me. But I believed in us. I believed 2 years meant something solid. I believed relationships were built for moments like this, not broken by them. I was wrong. After I told Mason about the layoff, something shifted between us, quietly but unmistakably. It wasn't an argument. There were no raised voices or slammed doors. It was subtler than that, which somehow made it worse. The air felt heavier, like a room where a window had been shut without my noticing. He went back to stirring the sauce, nodding as if he'd heard me, but his attention had already drifted somewhere else. "Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out," he said eventually. His words were neutral, but his tone wasn't. It lacked the warmth I was used to, the reassurance I expected from someone who loved me. I waited for a follow-up question, for concern, for anything that sounded like we were facing this together. It never came. That week, he became busy in ways he hadn't before. Late meetings, drinks with coworkers, friends he suddenly needed to catch up with. Every time I suggested dinner or even a quick walk, there was a reason he couldn't. I told myself not to be paranoid. People handle stress differently, I thought. Maybe this was his way of processing. But the distance kept growing. I was focused on preparing for my startup interview, reviewing notes, rehearsing answers, reminding myself that my career hadn't ended just because one company made cuts. Meanwhile, Mason's messages grew shorter, less affectionate. Sometimes hours would pass before he replied at all. When we did talk, the conversations felt surface level, like we were both avoiding something neither of us wanted to name. I replayed our past in my head, looking for clues I might have missed. Moments where he'd asked how long I planned to stay in my role. Times he'd compared my career path to his friends. Jokes about security that hadn't felt like jokes at all. At the time, I'd brushed them off as harmless commentary. Now they echoed differently. His family added to the pressure without saying anything outright. His mother sent a casual message asking how work was going, followed by a comment about how important stability was at this stage in life. His father joked, during a group dinner, about how unpredictable the tech world could be. Everyone laughed. I smiled too, even though my stomach tightened. Mason never defended me. He never contradicted them. He just sat there, quiet, watching how I reacted. By Friday, the day of my interview, we barely spoke. I texted him afterward, excited, relieved, hopeful. "Interview went great," I wrote. "Offer coming Monday. Want to celebrate tonight?" 2 hours passed before his response arrived. "Can't tonight. Tomorrow." It felt like postponement had become his default answer. I didn't know then that he was already pulling away, already rewriting our story in his head. I was still operating under the assumption that relationships bend under pressure, not break. I thought love allowed room for uncertainty. What I didn't realize was that, for Mason, uncertainty wasn't something to endure. It was something to escape. And he was already looking for the exit. Saturday arrived quietly, almost deceptively normal. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, trying to reclaim a sense of control by organizing shelves and folding laundry with unnecessary precision. Around noon, I drove to my old office to clear out my desk. They'd given us access on weekends, a small mercy meant to make layoffs feel more humane. I packed up notebooks, cables, a framed photo I hadn't looked at in years. Each item felt heavier than it should have, not because I missed the job, but because it marked the end of a chapter I hadn't chosen to close. By the time I got home, it was early afternoon. I set the box down just inside the door, leaned against the wall, and checked my phone out of habit. That was when I saw Mason's message. "I've been thinking a lot this week. I don't think this is working anymore. I'm not wasting my 20s with someone who's broke. I need stability, and you can't give me that right now. I'm sorry. Please don't call me. I read it once, then again, then a third time, as if repetition might change the meaning. My chest tightened, not with anger at first, but with disbelief. The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life, someone else's breakup. I sank onto the couch, still holding my phone, the cardboard box untouched behind me. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears. I thought about everything I hadn't said yet, about the interview, about the offer coming Monday, about the way I'd walked out of that building feeling hopeful for the first time all week. He hadn't waited. He hadn't asked. He hadn't even called. He decided my worth in the space between job security and uncertainty, and he left before I could finish the sentence. I didn't respond, not because I was trying to be strong, but because I couldn't find words that didn't feel wasted. Anything I said would come after a judgment he'd already made. So I sat there, letting the reality settle into my bones. Monday morning at 10 a.m., the offer arrived. The base salary was lower than my previous job, but the equity package was significant, and the signing bonus alone was more than enough to bridge the gap. $40,000 up front. I stared at the numbers, thinking about how differently the past 48 hours could have gone if he'd waited. I signed the offer that afternoon, not out of spite, not to prove anything. I signed it because it was right for me, because it aligned with where I was headed, not where I'd been. Still, I couldn't shake the sting of how quickly he'd walked away, how easily 2 years had been reduced to a financial evaluation. That moment wasn't just a breakup, it was a revelation. It showed me exactly who he was when things stopped being convenient. And it was only the beginning. The days after the breakup blurred together in a strange, muted way. On the surface, my life was moving forward. I had a new job, a fresh start, something tangible to focus on. But underneath that momentum was a quiet, persistent ache I couldn't shake. Not because I missed Mason, not exactly, but because of how disposable he'd made me feel in a single message. I replayed our conversations over and over, searching for the moment where things could have gone differently. I asked myself questions I didn't want to answer. Had I leaned too heavily on the idea of stability? Had I assumed love meant unconditional support without ever confirming that he saw it the same way? Was there something I should have noticed sooner? There was a part of me that wanted to blame myself because self-blame feels productive. It gives you the illusion of control. If it was my fault, then I could fix it next time. But every time that thought surfaced, another followed close behind. I hadn't lied. I hadn't hidden anything. I had handled the situation calmly and responsibly. The truth was uncomfortable, but clear. He hadn't left because I failed. He left because uncertainty scared him more than losing me. My first month at the startup was intense. Long hours, fast decisions, a team that moved like they were building something they believed in. I threw myself into the work because it demanded my full attention. There wasn't room for overthinking when deadlines were tight and expectations were high. For the first time in a long while, I felt challenged in a way that energized me instead of draining me. I didn't hear from Mason. I deleted his number. I unfollowed him on social media. I told myself that closure didn't require a conversation. Sometimes understanding is enough, or so I thought. 6 weeks in, the company gave me access to a corporate car service for client meetings. It wasn't extravagant, just practical. A black sedan, a professional driver, a small symbol of how quickly my circumstances had shifted. I didn't think much of it until the day I used it to go to the mall, buying clothes for an upcoming client presentation. When I stepped out of the car and heard my name, my body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tensed, my breath caught. I turned around and saw Mason standing there, shopping bags in hand, staring at me like the ground had just moved under his feet. The conversation was awkward, stiff at first. His eyes kept flicking to the car, then back to me. I answered his questions calmly, factually. Yes, it was a company car. Yes, I was working at a startup. Yes, things were going well. Then came the smile, the familiar one, the one he used when he wanted something. "Can we talk?" he asked, touching my arm lightly, like the past could be picked up exactly where he'd dropped it. Something inside me hardened, not anger, clarity. I told him no. I reminded him, gently but firmly, why. He tried to explain, to reframe his decision as fear, as a mistake, as something temporary. I listened, but I didn't soften. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to be understood. I already understood him. I walked away, leaving him standing there, and felt something unexpected rise in my chest. Relief. That night, after I got home from the mall, my phone lit up with a message request on Instagram. I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. His name sat there like a familiar weight, something I'd set down but not thrown away. When I finally tapped it, the words were almost apologetic, carefully arranged, as if he'd practiced them before hitting send. Can we talk? I made a mistake. I've been thinking about you a lot. I realized I overreacted. You didn't deserve that text. I was going through things and I took it out on you. Can we please just have one conversation? I stared at the screen longer than I wanted to admit. Not because I missed him, but because part of me needed to say something. Needed to put into words what his silence and sudden interest had done to me. I typed slowly, deliberately. You made your priorities clear when you dumped me for being broke. I'm not interested in being with someone who only wants me when I'm successful. Good luck with everything. The typing indicator appeared almost immediately. Dots blinking, disappearing, blinking again. He was anxious now. That alone told me more than his words ever could. That's not fair, he wrote. I cared about you. I just got scared about the future. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, but it passed quickly. You cared about my stability, not me. There's a difference. There was a pause this time, then more typing. So that's it? You won't even give me a chance to explain? You had 2 years to show me who you were. That text just confirmed it. I'm moving on. You should too. I blocked him before he could reply. The next day, a message came through from an unknown number. Hey, it's Mason. I got your number from a mutual friend. Please don't block this one. I just need you to understand that I made a mistake. I was immature, and I'm sorry. Can we meet up and talk about this like adults? I showed it to a coworker during lunch, more out of disbelief than anything else. He laughed, shaking his head. She saw the car and now wants back in. Classic. I nodded. I know I'm done. I blocked that number too. But Mason wasn't done. Over the next week, he tried again and again. Different numbers, a new Instagram account, even a message through LinkedIn, carefully worded to sound professional, as if that made the intrusion acceptable. Each one carried the same message: regret, apology, a request for access he'd already given up. Every attempt felt more desperate than the last, and with each one, something shifted inside me. The power dynamic had changed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't defending myself. I was simply choosing not to engage. That's when he crossed a line. A month later, during a work happy hour celebrating a major client deal, I felt a tap on my shoulder while ordering drinks at the bar. I turned around, and there he was, Mason, standing inside my professional space, surrounded by my coworkers, smiling like he belonged there. I felt my jaw tighten. You need to leave, I said quietly. I just want 5 minutes, he pleaded. Please. No. When he refused to move, when his voice grew louder and eyes turned toward us, I realized something important. This wasn't about closure. This was about control, and he hated that he no longer had it. The bar had gone quieter than I realized. Laughter dulled. Conversation slowed. I could feel eyes on us, curious, uncomfortable, waiting to see what would happen next. Mason stood there, his face tight with frustration, his voice just loud enough to make sure I couldn't ignore him without causing a scene. For the first time since the breakup, I felt cornered. I'm not leaving until you talk to me, he said, his tone sharp now, stripped of apology. Something inside me sank, not because I doubted my decision, but because I hated that he had followed me here, that he had taken something that belonged to my work, my progress, my sense of safety, and turned it into another battleground. My coworkers didn't know our history. To them, this was just an awkward interruption. To me, it felt like my past refusing to stay where it belonged. If you don't leave, I said evenly, I'm calling security. For a split second, his confidence cracked. His eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his face. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected me to draw a hard line in public, to choose myself without hesitation. You wouldn't, he said, but there was no conviction behind it. We stood there in silence, tension stretching between us. I could hear my own breathing, steady but heavy. I could feel my pulse in my neck. Around us, the bar staff pretended not to notice, and my coworker, the one who'd unknowingly revealed our location online, hovered nearby, uncertain. Mason looked around, finally registering the attention he was drawing. The realization hit him slowly, painfully. He wasn't in control here. He wasn't the one with leverage. He was just an unwelcome guest. Fine, he snapped. But you're making a huge mistake. We were good together. I met his gaze. Were we? Because I remember being dumped over text the second things got uncertain. I was scared, and I was unemployed. One of those is temporary. The other is who you are. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His shoulders sagged, just slightly. Then he grabbed his jacket and walked out without another word. When he was gone, the noise of the bar slowly returned, but I felt hollow. My coworker stepped closer, his expression apologetic. Everything okay? Yeah, I said, forcing a small smile. She was just leaving. Later that night, alone in my apartment, the adrenaline faded, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I sat on the edge of my bed and let myself feel it all. The anger, the disappointment, the grief for the version of love I thought I had. I realized that even though I'd been strong, even though I'd said no, there was still a wound there. That was my darkest moment, not because I wanted him back, but because I finally accepted that the relationship I mourned never truly existed. I had loved the idea of who he could be, not who he was when it mattered. And that realization hurt more than the breakup ever did. The morning after the happy hour confrontation, I woke up earlier than usual. The apartment was quiet, washed in pale light, and for the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear instead of crowded. There was no urge to check my phone, no anxiety about whether another message would appear. I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that something had shifted for good. Later that day, one final message came through from Mason. You're right, I was shallow and I hurt you. I'm sorry. I hope you find someone who deserves you. I read it once, then again. There was no manipulation in it this time, no request attached, no attempt to pull me back into conversation. Just an admission he'd avoided making until every other door had closed. I didn't respond. I didn't block him either. I simply left it there, unread but acknowledged, and went on with my day. At work, things were moving fast. The startup was gaining traction. We were closing deals, expanding teams, and talking seriously about future funding. I was trusted with bigger decisions, included in conversations that mattered. For the first time in a long while, I felt valued for what I brought to the table, not what I symbolized to someone else. During a meeting that afternoon, one of my teammates made an offhand comment about how calm I'd been handling pressure lately. You don't seem rattled by much, he said, half joking. I smiled, but the words stayed with me. He was right. I wasn't rattled anymore. I wasn't bracing for disappointment or trying to anticipate someone else's expectations. I was grounded. That night, I went for a long walk, letting the city noise fade into the background. I thought about the woman I'd been when I first met Mason, how eager she'd been to fit into a future someone else had outlined, how willing she'd been to overlook discomfort in the name of love. And I realized that losing him hadn't broken me. It had stripped away an illusion. The turning point wasn't his apology. It wasn't the car, or the job, or the public confrontation. It was the quiet understanding that I didn't need to prove my worth to someone who only saw value when it benefited them. I didn't need closure wrapped in conversation. I already had clarity. I chose to let go completely, not with bitterness, but with resolve. Whatever came next in my life would be built on mutual respect, on shared resilience, on the understanding that love doesn't disappear the moment things get hard. That decision changed everything. Time has a way of revealing consequences without anyone needing to orchestrate them. I didn't have to say anything about Mason to my coworkers. I didn't have to explain myself to mutual friends. I didn't have to correct the narrative. The truth unfolded on its own, quietly but thoroughly, and it didn't land where he expected it to. A few weeks after the happy hour incident, I learned, through secondhand conversations I never asked for, that his persistence hadn't gone unnoticed. People talk, especially when someone shows up uninvited, refuses to leave, and tries to pressure an ex into a conversation in a professional setting. The version of him that had been charming and confident began to look unstable, desperate. His behavior reframed the breakup in ways he couldn't control. Friends who had once nodded sympathetically when he described me as uncertain started asking uncomfortable questions. Why had he ended things so abruptly? Why over text? Why now, when I was clearly doing well? The answers he gave didn't hold up. They never had. Without me present to absorb the blame, the spotlight stayed on him. His family shifted too. The same people who had once asked about stability now seemed embarrassed by how things had played out. I heard his mother had asked why he'd let a good relationship go so easily, why he'd acted impulsively instead of supportive. He didn't have a satisfying response. Regret sounds hollow when it comes too late. Meanwhile, my life continued to expand. The startup closed a major funding round. Series B, bigger than anyone had anticipated when I first walked through the door. My equity, once an abstract promise, became something tangible. I was promoted to senior architect, my base salary surpassing what I'd earned at my old job. Not because I chased validation, but because I did the work and earned the trust. I ran into Mason only once more, indirectly. A mutual friend mentioned seeing him with someone new, someone who fit the image he'd always talked about. Finance background, flashy lifestyle. It didn't stir jealousy or satisfaction in me, just distance. I wished him well, genuinely. Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I no longer needed resentment. I left quietly. No speeches, no final messages, no dramatic exits. I simply removed myself from his orbit entirely. And without an audience or opposition, his story lost momentum. There was nothing left for him to push against. That was the real fallout. Not punishment, not revenge, just the natural consequence of showing someone who you are when things stop being easy. It's been 4 months since the day I stepped out of that company car and came face to face with a version of my past I no longer belong to. Life has settled into something quieter now, not in the sense of being smaller, but in the sense of being steadier. The kind of calm that comes from knowing who you are and what you will no longer accept. The startup is doing well, better than we expected. There's talk of long-term growth, of possibilities that once felt distant and abstract now becoming part of real conversations. I wake up most mornings feeling challenged, not threatened, engaged, not anxious. For the first time in years, my work feels aligned with who I am becoming, not just who I've been. I'm seeing someone new, a man who works as a project manager at a nonprofit. He makes less than I do, and he doesn't care about that at all. We met in a bookstore, both reaching for the same science fiction novel, laughing at the coincidence instead of competing for it. We take things slowly. We talk about ideas, values, fears. There's no performance, no measuring, no unspoken conditions. It feels real in a way that doesn't need constant reassurance. I saw on social media, through a mutual friend's story, that Mason is dating someone new too. He looks happy, or at least presentable. I hope he is happy. I truly do. Not because I owe him kindness, but because carrying bitterness would only weigh me down. What I learned through all of this is simple, but it took me a long time to understand. Someone who only wants you when you're winning was never really in your corner. They weren't building with you. They were just enjoying the ride. And the moment the road got uncertain, they jumped out before they had to face discomfort. The irony is that my life never crashed. It just changed lanes. And I'm driving better without him in the passenger seat.